Charles Bukowski was 49 years old when he walked out of the post office for the last time. 49. Most men at that age are thinking about retirement funds, about stability, about the final 20 years of work before they can rest. Bukowski walked out with nothing. A small monthly stipend from a publisher who believed in his writing, $100 a month. Barely enough for rent in a cheap Los Angeles apartment. Not enough to eat well, not enough to feel safe. He had worked at the United States Postal Service for 11 years, sorting mail under fluorescent lights that seemed designed to kill anything human inside you. 8-hour shifts of picking up envelopes, reading zip codes, placing them in slots, again, again, again. 11 years of this. 11 years of his hands doing work his mind couldn't bear to witness. The day he quit, he went home, sat down at his typewriter, and he wrote a novel in 3 weeks. Post office, about those 11 years. About men whose bodies kept moving long after something inside them had died. About what it means to survive work that has no meaning, no beauty, no mercy. Most people, when they leave a job, perform gratitude. They thank their supervisors, they say it was a good experience, that they learned a lot, that they'll miss the people. They perform, because performance makes transitions smooth, keeps bridges intact, protects reputation. Bukowski didn't perform. He wrote the truth, that the work had been death, that his coworkers were living ghosts, that the fluorescent lights were a kind of violence, that he had survived by drinking before his shift, during his breaks, after his shift, not because he was weak, but because being fully conscious in that building was unbearable. The book wasn't kind. It wasn't diplomatic. It didn't soften the edges to make itself more palatable. And this is where his life begins to mean something. Not when he became famous, not when he started making money, but here, at 49, walking out of a building that had been killing him slowly for 11 years, choosing uncertainty over safety, choosing truth over comfort. He risked everything, and he knew it, and he did it anyway. Because staying would have been a performance. Staying would have been pretending that this was acceptable, that this was just how life was, that you didn't question it, you just endured it until you died or retired, whichever came first. He walked out, and he never performed again. He wrote about this later, about how the fluorescent lights felt like a kind of death, about how the work wasn't difficult, it was soul-crushing, about how the real skill required wasn't sorting mail, it was surviving the knowledge that this was your life, that this was what you did with your days, that this was how you spent the limited time you had on Earth. Most people develop defenses. They tell themselves the job is temporary. They tell themselves it's not that bad. They tell themselves everyone has to do things they don't want to do. They perform acceptance until the performance becomes their reality. Bukowski never developed those defenses. Every day at the post office, he felt it fully, the meaninglessness, the waste, the slow grinding down of whatever he had once been. And he survived by refusing to integrate it, by keeping himself separate from the work, by drinking, yes, but also by writing, by going home after his shift and sitting at his typewriter and writing about what he had seen, what he had felt, what it was doing to him. The writing wasn't therapy, it was evidence, proof that he was still alive, that something in him hadn't died yet. 11 years of this. 11 years of his body going through the motions while his mind screamed. 11 years of knowing he was wasting his life and not being able to stop. Until he stopped. Until he walked out. Until he chose poverty over one more day in that building. And what he learned there, what those 11 years taught him, was that most people will choose safety over truth, will choose performance over honesty, will choose survival over aliveness. He made the other choice, and it cost him everything, and he never regretted it. Bukowski started writing young, 20s, maybe earlier. He sent his stories and poems to magazines, small literary journals,
the kind that published 3 times a year and paid in contributor copies. They rejected him, over and over, for years. He kept the rejection slips, not as motivation, not as fuel for some future revenge, but as evidence, proof that he was trying, proof that he was still here, proof that he hadn't given up yet. By the time his first poem was published, he was 35 years old. 35! 15 years of riding into a void, 15 years of being told implicitly and explicitly that his work wasn't good enough, that he should try somewhere else, that he should try something else. Most people would have quit, would have taken the rejection as a sign that they weren't meant to be a writer, that they should find something more realistic, something more achievable. But quitting would have been a performance. Quitting would have been pretending that he could be something other than what he was. And what he was a writer. Not a successful writer, not a published writer, just a writer. Someone who wrote because not writing felt like death. The poem that finally got published wasn't remarkable. It wasn't the kind of poem that changes literature or gets anthologized or wins awards. It was raw, angry, real. And someone finally said yes. Not because the poem was brilliant, but because it was honest, because it refused to soften itself to be more acceptable, because it was exactly what Charles Bukowski had always written: ugly, direct, unflinching. This is what obscurity teaches you, if you survive it, that validation is not the point, that publication is not the point, that success is not the point. The point is the work, the daily practice of sitting down and writing even when no one is reading, even when no one cares, even when you have every reason to believe that no one ever will. Obscurity is a kind of purity. You can't perform for an audience that doesn't exist. You can't write what people want when you have no idea who those people are or what they want. You can only write what you need to write, what demands to be written. Bukowski's 15 years of rejection weren't wasted time. They were the forge, the place where his voice became itself, where he learned to write without compromise, because compromise would have meant writing for imaginary gatekeepers who kept saying no anyway. By the time he was published, he was already Bukowski. The rejection hadn't broken him. It had refined him, had burned away everything that wasn't essential. Most writers, when they finally get published, soften. They start writing for the audience. They start thinking about what will sell, what will be liked, what will get them more publications. Bukowski didn't soften. He kept writing the same raw, ugly, honest work he had always written, because he had learned something in those 15 years of obscurity, that external validation changes nothing, that you're either real or you're performing, and performing gets you nothing except the exhaustion of maintaining the performance. He stayed real, even when it kept getting him rejected, even when it kept him poor, even when it would have been easier, safer, more profitable to soften his edges and write what people wanted. He wrote what he needed to write, and eventually the world caught up. But he never waited for the world. He just kept writing. Her name was Jane Cooney Baker. She was 10 years older than Bukowski, an alcoholic like him. They met in a bar in Los Angeles in the 1940s. They fell in love the way broken people fall in love. Not gently, not carefully, but with a kind of desperate recognition. Like finding another survivor of something no one else understands. She drank, he drank. They fought, they fucked, they hurt each other. They stayed together anyway. This is not a romantic story. This is not a story about how love heals you or saves you or makes you whole. This is a story about 2 people who were both drowning and who held on to each other even though neither of them could swim. Jane died young. Alcoholism. Her body gave out before his did. Bukowski wrote about her for the rest of his life. Not with nostalgia, not with sentimentality, but with a kind of raw honesty that most people can't bear to bring to love. He wrote about how they destroyed each other, how they enabled each other's worst impulses, how they stayed together not because it was healthy or good or right, but because they couldn't imagine being with anyone else, because no one else would have tolerated them, because they were both too broken to perform normalcy in a relationship with someone who expected it. Most people, when they write about lost love, perform tragedy. They romanticize the relationship. They edit out the ugly parts. They make it into a story about star-crossed lovers or tragic timing or cruel fate. Bukowski didn't do that. He wrote about the fights, the cruelty, the nights she passed out on the bathroom floor and he left her there because he was too drunk to help her up. The mornings they woke up hating each other. The fact that they stayed together anyway. He wrote about how he loved her and how that love didn't fix anything, didn't make either of them better, didn't heal either of them, just made them less alone in their brokenness. This is what honesty looks like in love. Not the performance of devotion, not the story where love conquers all, but the truth that sometimes love is just two people recognizing each other's damage and deciding it's better to be broken together than alone. Jane died, and Bukowski kept drinking, kept writing, kept living the same life he had always lived. People expected him to be changed by her death, expected grief to transform him, expected him to quit drinking, to get sober, to honor her memory by becoming better. He didn't. He stayed exactly who he was, because changing would have been a performance, would have been pretending that grief fixes you, that loss makes you wise, that suffering has a purpose. He just kept going, kept writing, kept drinking, kept being broken. And he wrote about Jane honestly, not as a saint, not as a muse, but as a woman who was as fucked up as he was, who drank herself to death, who he loved anyway. That honesty, that refusal to make her into something she wasn't even in death, is the only real tribute. The only way to honor someone is to tell the truth about them, to let them be complicated, to let them be flawed, to let them be human. Bukowski did that. For Jane, for himself, for everyone he wrote about. He never made anyone into a symbol. He just showed you who they were and let you decide what to do with that. Bukowski was cruel, to women mostly. He wrote about them with a kind of contempt that's hard to read, used them, discarded them, mocked them in his poems. This is the part of his life that doesn't fit the narrative, the part that makes him difficult to admire, the part that reminds you that honesty is not the same as goodness. He was honest about his cruelty, wrote about it plainly, didn't hide it or justify it or pretend it was something other than what it was. But that doesn't make it acceptable, doesn't make it okay, doesn't mean we should excuse it because he was being real. Honesty can be a weapon. Refusal to perform kindness can be its own kind of violence. Bukowski hurt people, not just emotionally, physically. There are stories, multiple stories, of him hitting women, throwing things, being drunk and violent and terrifying. He wrote about this too, not with remorse exactly, but with acknowledgement, with a kind of unflinching self-awareness that most abusers never achieve. This is the paradox of Bukowski. He was honest about being a terrible person. Does that make him less terrible or just more self-aware? There's no easy answer, and that's the point. Refusing to perform doesn't make you good. It just makes you visible. And sometimes what becomes visible is ugly, is unforgivable, is the kind of thing that should be condemned, not celebrated. Bukowski's refusal to pretend extended to his own worst impulses. He didn't hide his cruelty, didn't perform remorse when he didn't feel it, didn't pretend to be better than he was. And that honesty is both his greatest strength and his greatest failure. Because honesty without empathy is just brutality. Truth without compassion is just cruelty with better publicity. Bukowski had empathy sometimes. You can see it in his best work, in the way he wrote about ordinary people with dignity, in the way he saw beauty in things other people dismissed. But he didn't have it consistently, didn't have it when it mattered most,
didn't have it for the women who loved him and who he hurt. This is what refusing to perform looks like at its worst. It looks like a man who won't lie about who he is, even when who he is causes real harm. It looks like honesty used as an excuse for cruelty. And we don't have to forgive this. We don't have to excuse it. We don't have to pretend it's okay just because he was being real. We can hold both truths at once. That Bukowski was honest in ways most people never are, and that his honesty didn't make him good, didn't make him safe, didn't make him someone you'd want in your life. The world doesn't need more people who are honest about being cruel. The world needs people who are honest and kind, honest and empathetic, honest and accountable. Bukowski was honest, that's all. And sometimes that's not enough. Bukowski became famous at 50. After decades of poverty, rejection, obscurity, suddenly people wanted to read him. Publishers wanted him. Venues wanted him for readings. Money came. Not a fortune, but enough. And nothing changed. He kept writing the same raw, ugly, honest work, kept drinking, kept living in cheap apartments, kept being exactly who he had always been. Success didn't transform him because transformation would have been a performance, would have been pretending that external validation had fixed something internal that had never been fixable. He gave readings drunk, showed up late, insulted audiences, read poems mocking the very people who had paid to see him. This wasn't rebellion. This wasn't an act. This was just Bukowski refusing to perform gratitude, refusing to play the role of the successful writer who was gracious and humble and appreciative. Publishers wanted him to be more palatable. Readers wanted him to be less angry. Critics wanted him to be more literary, more serious, more respectable. He said no to all of it, kept writing what he had always written, because changing would have been a betrayal, not of his audience, of himself. This is what consistency looks like. Not changing when circumstances change, not performing a new version of yourself for a new audience, just being exactly who you are, whether you're poor or successful, obscure or famous, struggling or comfortable. Most people, when they finally achieve what they've been working toward, perform transformation. They perform humility. They perform gratitude. They tell the story where struggle led to success and success led to wisdom, and now they're better, wiser, more whole. Bukowski never told that story. He just said, "I'm the same person I've always been. I just have more money now. Nothing else has changed." And he was right. Success doesn't fix you. Fame doesn't heal you. Money doesn't make you whole. You're just yourself at every stage. And you either perform different versions of yourself for different circumstances, or you stay exactly who you are and let the circumstances change around you. Bukowski stayed exactly who he was, and that consistency, that refusal to perform growth or healing or transformation is what made his work undeniable. Because you always knew you were getting the real thing. Not the performance, not the curated version, just Bukowski, raw, ugly, honest, real. Bukowski died at 73, liver cancer. Decades of drinking finally caught up. He was working on a manuscript when he died, still writing, still at the typewriter, still doing the only thing that had ever mattered to him. He didn't retire, didn't decide he'd written enough, didn't stop. Because writing, for him, was not a career. It was not a way to achieve something or become someone. Writing was the only honest thing he knew how to do. Everything else was performance. Relationships were performance. Jobs were performance. Social interaction was performance. But writing, sitting alone with a typewriter, putting words on paper, that was real. That was the one place he didn't have to pretend. He wrote every day, for decades, through poverty, through fame, through sickness, through hangovers, through depression.
He wrote because not writing would have been a kind of death, would have been admitting there was nothing left to say, nothing left worth being honest about. And what he left behind is not a philosophy, not a system, not a set of instructions for how to live. What he left behind is evidence. Evidence that you can refuse to perform, that you can be real, fully real for your entire life, that you can stay exactly who you are regardless of circumstances, and that this refusal will cost you everything: comfort, safety, respectability, connection, health. But it will give you the only thing that matters: a life that is yours. Not a performed life, not a curated life, not a life lived for other people's approval. Just your life. Raw, ugly, broken, honest, real.
Bukowski died writing. And there is something unbearably true about that he worked until the end, that he never stopped, that he never softened. Most people, at the end, perform peace, perform acceptance, perform wisdom. They tell the story where their life meant something, where their struggles led somewhere, where everything worked out the way it was supposed to. Bukowski never told that story. He just kept writing, right up until he couldn't anymore. And what he wrote was not beautiful, was not uplifting, was not the kind of thing you read for comfort or inspiration. What he wrote was real, and real is what most writing isn't. He died at his typewriter, working, honest, refusing to perform even at the end. And that is enough. That has always been enough. You are performing right now. You know you are. You perform at work, you perform in relationships, you perform on social media, you perform some version of yourself that is acceptable, palatable, safe. And you are exhausted, not from living, from pretending to live. Bukowski's life asks you one question: how long are you willing to keep doing this? Not should you quit your job and become a writer, not should you drink yourself to death, not should you hurt people and call it honesty. Just how long are you willing to perform? Because the performance is killing you, slowly, quietly, acceptably. You feel it, that distance between who you are and who you're pretending to be, that constant monitoring, that exhausting vigilance. Bukowski stopped performing at 49, walked out of the post office, risked everything, chose uncertainty over safety. And he paid for it, in poverty, in loneliness, in physical destruction, in being hated and dismissed and misunderstood. But he never performed again. He stayed exactly who he was for the rest of his life. Most people can't do that. Most people need safety more than they need honesty, need approval more than they need realness, need comfort more than they need truth. And that's okay. That's not weakness. That's just a different choice. But you should know what it costs. You should know that every day you perform, you die a little. That every day you pretend, something in you gets smaller. You should know that there is another way. It's brutal. It's costly. It's not for everyone. But it exists. Bukowski lived it, and he left behind evidence. Not a philosophy, not a system, not instructions, just a life, lived honestly until the end. Are you performing? You know you are. The only question is, how long are you willing to keep doing it? Bukowski answered that question at 49. He walked out. He stopped pretending. He never performed again. When will you answer it?